Hi, Stan. So news broke this morning that Mike Hoffman's coming to camp on a PTO. Just some thoughts on what he brings to the group here.
Yeah, well, he's a veteran player, obviously. He's had a great career so far, and we think he'd be a nice addition to the camp. And it's a competitive environment, and he's a veteran. He's been a pretty consistent offensive player throughout his career, so we're going to take a look at him and see how he fits in with our mix. But not just him. I think we're looking for all of our guys to take a step forward here and show us what they can do. And a lot of optimism for our group, but it's always good to have some competition as well.
Draisaitl's contract's done. You can't really say much about McDavid's, but I'm curious if you have any information on potential talks with Evan Bouchard, who's up next summer.
Yep, nothing on that yet, and we might get to that as well. But I think we're focused on Leon to obviously with him being a pending unrestricted free agent, that was a top priority. Bouchard's in a little bit of a different situation. He's still a very big priority for our team. He had a fantastic season. He's a great player, and I think his best years are still ahead of him. So, we'll definitely get to that at some point.
Stan, do you have an update on Evander and then kind of what you expect for usage from Darnell?
Yeah, Evander is going to have surgery. We'll probably announce that when he's going to have it. It's going to be soon. So he is going to, not be available for training camp and the beginning of the season. So I don't really want to speak on the medical part. We'll get our doctors to comment on that, but he is going to be having surgery. As far as Darnell, what was your specific question?
Just on kind of where he's at in his usage and like non-contact drills to contact. Do you expect him to be ready later in training camp?
Yep, I do. I think, this is just if anything, we want to be cautious with it. I mean, he's a very important player for us. He plays a lot of minutes, and training camp's important, but clearly being ready for the season is the most important thing. So I think we'll take that as we go as far as, when he'll be ready for like full contact or participation.
And can you give us maybe kind of your expectations, a little bit of a scouting report on what you expect from Podkolzin and what type of role he would play in your team?
Yeah, I think getting him in here with our team, sometimes a fresh start is great for players like that. I've seen that over my time. He's certainly a high-profile player. He came in with high expectations, and when that doesn't always match right away, there can be a challenge as far as the outlook. But I think we're looking at it as an optimistic situation. He's clearly got a lot of talent. There's a lot of things I like about his game. I think he brings the element of physicality, which is something that I think is important. And I think he can score. He's got a great shot. I think that's an element that he has, which is going to help him find a role on our team. But the thing I liked the most when we watched and we studied him was his willingness to be an aggressive player. He's a big body. He can skate. He's certainly got skill. But I think he brings maybe the power side of his game, which is something that we're looking for. We have a lot of skill on our team, and that's great. You have to be able to score, and you want to make plays. So he's got the skill side, but I think, with his physicality, I think he's going to hopefully find a role for us.
Just over here, I know, and to follow up on Evander Kane, I know he hasn't had the surgery yet, but do you have an expected timeline for him right now in terms of when he can come back?
I don't. I mean, he's going to be out for a while. I don't want to speculate on that. I think our doctors will be able to give you a better handle on that, but he's not going to be here for a while.
It seems like, with the roster, if there's one spot that's a little up in the air or in flux or whatever, given the turnover, it's right defense. How would you kind of categorize the battle there?
Yeah, I think we have a few players to mention. Obviously, Stetcher was here last year, but he got injured. He didn't get a chance to play very much. And then we've got Brown and Emberson. So those three righties are probably going to show us what they can do in training camp and where they fit on our team. I would expect all of them to play a role for us this year. It's really over the next couple weeks to see who fits where and which one is going to play a bigger role. But I would expect all of them to be a factor for us this year. They bring different elements to their game. Emberson's younger than the other two. The other two are more experienced players, and obviously Brown's a big guy and he's physical, he's strong. Stetcher has, even though he's a smaller guy, he plays bigger. He's a competitive defenseman with a combination of skills. So I think that's one of the things I'm excited to see is how it unfolds over the next couple weeks here. But we have to sort that part of our game out. That is obviously one thing that's not settled yet. And that's the good thing that's why we have camp and exhibition games to try to figure out who's going to be where.
I stand over here. Just specific to Emberson, he had some good numbers in San Jose, but he's only played 30 games in the NHL. What are the expectations for him, and do you kind of really know what you have there yet with that player?
Well, yeah, at the NHL level, his experience is limited, but I think the nice part about his background is he had that experience with Chris in Hartford, so there's a familiarity with our head coach. And, I've watched a lot of his games, a lot of his video, not just when he was in San Jose, but even prior to that. I really like what I see. I'm familiar with him just going back to his draft year. He was a player that, we had followed closely at the U.S. program and at Wisconsin. So he's a player I feel like I'm comfortable watching and knowing what kind of things he brings to the table. But you're right, he doesn't have a big sample of NHL games. But that's probably more due to opportunity than it is necessarily his ability. We want to give him the chance to show what he can do. But I think the familiarity with Chris Knobloch is going to be important. He's got the ability to somebody he's coached before. He knows how he operates, how to motivate him best, and how to utilize him best. So that's a benefit coming into the season.
Back to Daniel's question on the right side of the blue line. I know in an ideal world, you've got some guys that can come in and compete for these spots and maybe on the second pairing there. But there are also some players with lots of experience that are unsigned that are sitting out there. How active would you say you are in exploring those options? Is that more about the cap, or kind of where's your head at on what's available right now?
Yeah, well, the cap is always a big factor in our decisions. We are under the cap right now, and we want to remain that way. Our goal is to try to accrue cap space so that we have the flexibility in season to be able to make an addition. There's a lot happens in the next 3 to 4 weeks with waivers, with players that are currently unsigned, as well as around the league. There's going to be teams where players emerge in the next couple weeks and look like they're better than teams expected, which makes other players available. So part of our job in the next month is to evaluate the options that we have, both internal and external, and that's all. It's an ongoing process, so it's hard to, I guess, game plan where we are in that process. We want to give the players who are here and signed a chance to show us what they can do, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't looking around to see if there's other players that could make our team better. So we know that's an area that we're going to be focusing on over the next few weeks heading into the regular season. So we'll just see how it all plays out.
Stan, there's no salary cap on R&D, on research and development. For those of us that were in Penticton, you had a lot more bodies on the hockey ops side, especially on the development. Can you maybe just speak a little to that? And I realize it's maybe a little bit of an esoteric conversation for today, but just the impetus that since you've started has, you've added several bodies there.
Yeah, I think player development's something that is of utmost importance to us, both in the short term and in the long term. I think it does sometimes take some time before you can see the fruits of that labor, because when you draft a player and they're part of your organization, oftentimes they're not going to actually help your NHL team for 2, 3, 4 years. But the player development people come in where they start working with the player from the day they're drafted. And the whole reason you do that is you want to try to accelerate that progression so the player can, instead of taking 3 years to make it, get them there in 2 to a year and a half to where they're actually ready to be an NHL player. Each player's timeline's a little bit different, but I think it takes a focus, and it's something that we had our full group there in Penticton to get to know these players. And the way I like to explain it is for our prospects, they all have coaches everywhere they are, whether they're in Bakersfield or they're in college or junior or they're in Europe. So they've got their coaches that are, trying to help them improve. Our player development coaches are like personal coaches for those players. Because one of my experiences over time, and this is a bit counterintuitive, but oftentimes with these junior teams or college teams, the best players sometimes get the least amount of attention because the coaching staffs on those organizations are sometimes limited, and they're focused on the bottom out of the lineup to try to get those players to be good enough to compete. And sometimes the best players don't get as much coaching as you would like. And that's where we come in. So we have our player development coaches, and they're like a personal coach. So they'll watch every shift of every game, and they'll be there to watch them in person. And when they're not in person, they're watching video. They're talking to them weekly. They're establishing that relationship and that connection so that by the time they eventually make it to pro hockey, whether that's in Bakersfield or here in Edmonton, they're going to have that close confidant, and they're going to know the areas of their game that aren't up to the NHL standard yet. And then it's our job to help them. Sometimes it's technical skills, but oftentimes it's other things, with its confidence, it's how to recover when you're struggling, if you're not in the lineup, if your role's not what you want it to be, teaching them how they go and meet with their coaches, have relationships with them, conversations that might be tough conversations. They need to be coached in all that. Like, nobody has really taught those players how to do it, how to be pros. And we're trying to do that from the time they're drafted. And eventually we think it's going to pay off.
Asked on Evander Kane would be, he was hurt all last year, most of last year. He was hurt all the playoffs, didn't practice for 2 months. We're pushing 3 months now since the season ended, and he still hasn't had surgery. How come?
I think the goal there was to determine the best path forward with his injury. And, sometimes when players, he can probably speak to this better than me, when players are injured, there's oftentimes a couple different ways that you can proceed with. You get a diagnosis, and sometimes it can be rehab, sometimes it's definite surgery, sometimes surgery is an option, but you might want to try to rehab it before. Because I think at the end of the day, nobody really wants to have surgery. There's always complications that can come from that. And, Evander would probably be better situated to speak about that. But the way we always handle it with our players is that at the end of the day, it's their body, it's their decision to make on. They can listen to the recommendations of doctors, but they have to get to the point to where, in their mind, this is definitely what I want to do. And it was recently where we reached that point with Evander, and he can probably explain his thought process on that.
Stan, in Dermott's case, the fact that he can play left side or right side, did that have a bearing in inviting him to training camp?
Yeah, I think Travis has some flexibility with his game. He's a versatile player. He's another guy we haven't talked about when the name came up on right defense, but he does have some ability to play both sides. So he's another guy that we're going to be focusing on here in training camp to see how he stacks up to the other players. He he's been a pro for a while, so he's got quite a bit of experience under his belt. And I think we want to see a few of those players take a step forward and emerge to show us that they definitely should be the guy.
And one last one on Evander. Have you made a decision whether he would go on IR or long-term injury?
We don't need to use long-term injury right now. We have the salary cap room he'll be on the regular roster. As we get into the season, if we run into a number of injuries that are shorter term in nature and then we need to bring bodies up, then we have the flexibility to put him on long-term injury. But part of the reason we made the moves we did over the summer was so that we would not be required to start the season with long-term injury, and that hasn't changed.
Thank you.
It was announced yesterday, Brad Holland leaving the organization. Anything you can say on that? And do you want to hire two people? Because he had a kind of a dual portfolio there.
We haven't decided what we're going to do. I mean, obviously that's something that just came along really recently here. So we certainly wish Brad the best. I have a great relationship with him. I think he's a really bright guy, and wish him well in where he lands next. But that's part of our business is change to be, whether it's on the ice or whether it's in the front office, it's constantly evolving. So, what we're going to do to fill that void, we haven't determined that yet. That's something we're going to talk about in the next few weeks here and come up with a game plan. But, Brad's a great man, and I wish him the best.